All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another Morbid Symptoms podcast. I'm your host, Tara Van Dyke, and I'm joined with the T to the TNT, Tanya. How are you doing this morning?
I'm doing well. Thank you.
Nice. And we have a new member of the Morbid Symptoms family. Hello, Vuk. Welcome. Do you want to say, okay. So Vuk, I was kind of joking that I was going to call you the positivist, but in a cool way. But you went with Vuk, so that's cool. That's also good.
But there's no other way than cool for positivist, though.
That's right. We're not going to get into a science war today, although as fun as those can be. Let me get this banner off here. I'm a one woman show behind the scenes, and I forget sometimes. And then I'm doing the editing, and I see that for like the first hour or so, I had live stream starting soon. Anyway, hello everyone, Happy New Year, or hopefully, who knows what 2025 will bring. You two are Canadian, so I have to say that welcome to the 51st state. We might all be subjects or citizens of the great American empire. Anyway,
let me see.
But that is not what we're here to talk about today. So the birth of sexology. This is part of our gender industry series. And a while back, I think it was before the holidays, we did kind of an overview of why it's important to look at gender identity and all this, everything after the LGB, after B, as an industry. And we kind of did an overview of the different sectors in that. And today we're going to focus on sexology and sexologists. And some people I think some people attribute the term gender identity and this notion that you can have a gender identity separate from your, that's not aligned or whatever with your sex, to Judith Butler, but actually it should be attributed to a sexologist. Money, I think, John Money. Yeah. Anyway, so, and while I was preparing for this, trying to figure out what the angle should be, I remembered, it popped into my head, Foucault's work. And he often would title his work either the main title or the subtitle with the birth of. So he wrote about the birth of the prison, and he wrote about the birth of the clinic, and among other things. And he did several books about, human sexuality, a 4-volume series, actually. So you can understand why my guess is that every sexologist, I'm pretty sure they get Foucault in their training package, or when they go to become get a bachelor's or a master's in sexology. I'm sure Fuko is in there. And anyway, so what I wanted to do, and we'll see how it turns out, Vuk and Tanya, is I had this idea that what if I introduced Foucault's Foucault's take on the birth of the birth of sexology as Foucault. So what I did is I dumped in my podcast notes for today, and I asked ChatGPT to do a script. I said, I get the prompts. I said, okay, Michel Foucault, like he's still alive, a professor emeritus. He's giving a lecture at the Sorbonne or something, or on the birth of sexology. Or the birth of the gender clinic. And I think it's kind of funny. So as a bit of an introduction, I'm just going to do Michel Foucault's imaginary lecture on the birth of sexology. And so what I'm going to try to do is, a lot of people don't know Michel Foucault. They probably know the name. Some will know the name. And I just want to lay my cards on the table. I am not a Foucaultian. I'm not a Foucault expert. I have, back in the day, back in grad school and post-grad, I have come across I have read a couple of his works. And when I was just starting my PhD in geography, everything was Foucault. Geography, sociology, urban studies, Foucault was everywhere. So you kind of had to pick it up. But don't come at me. This is very much my understanding of Michel Foucault and how he can be used to undermine, to kind of dismantle this notion that sexology and the things that follow from it, so gender medicine, gender clinic, all this stuff, or have anything to do, or anyway, that material or that scientific. So that's kind of the goal. And I thought about doing that, even though it might be a bit theoretical for people who aren't familiar with it, is because what we would call gender mentalists or sexologists love Foucault, or they love to throw Foucault around. So whenever you can use the kind of masters or your opponent's tools to counter or destabilize their argument, I think that's a good thing. So before I die to pretend to be Michel Foucault, any questions or comments?
I have one. I'm kind of curious, is sexology actually like a department anywhere, or like, for example,
it's a discipline.
Okay, but the two sexologists that I know are in psychology departments, and they're not
Mm.
really, they wouldn't call themselves sexologists, but other
Okay,
people
well,
do.
yeah.
So I'm just wondering, are there other, like, are there universities that have like a degree in this?
Yeah, you
Because
can get a master's degree, you can get a bachelor's degree or a master's degree in sexology.
okay,
And so there's a school of sexology, or it's a discipline, it's a recognized discipline, and you can get, as far as I know, a master's in it. Now, there's different types of sexologists. So let's just stay with there's people who do like counseling. So if people are having, they're unhappy with their sex life or their sexual well-being or their sexual health or what you want to call it, or, they can go to them for the more kind of psychological or I don't know, just to help out. Yeah. And then get this, what I've learned is that there's hands-off and hands-on sexologists. Okay. So there's also people who will help people figure out how to pleasure themselves and other people. I don't know if they put gloves on. I don't know how that happens, but there's hands-on and hands-off. And then there's the people, you can be sexologists who teach at schools. So then they'd be so they just maybe like, these are the main concepts, these are the main thinkers, main ideas about sexual health and consent and, gender identity and exploration and all this type of thing. So they would probably be Kinsley and Money and Fuko, of course, probably some feminist stuff in there. I don't know. And then you have people who get a degree in psychology or medicine and also will focus on sexual health, or will have a degree in do a degree program or something in sexology as well. So that's what I was able to find. So you do find, so the people who are the big poobahs in terms of like the trans stuff with Bailey and what's that guy's name? Blanchard.
Mhm.
I'm going to Americanize it. Blanchard. And they're psychologists and sexologists or something. He's a sexologist, psychologist, something like that.
yeah. Based in the Department of Psychology, sure, right? And there's no, just to let you know, there's no Foucault at all in a proper Department of Psychology.
Okay. Well, we're not talking about psychology today. We're talking about sexology. And so, but so I think it'll come clear this when I go through my little by way of introduction and imaginary lecture, because sexology is an important part of understanding the gender ideology, but also the industry part of it. But we'll get to that after. I'm going to try doing this little bit, and then we'll get it. Then we'll break it down. Yeah. Does that sound okay? Okay. All right. So I'm not going to do a French accent.
Do it. Do it.
So Michel Foucault's imaginary lecture on the birth of sexology. Okay. So, mesdames et messieurs, we are gathered here not merely to discuss sexology, but to interrogate its emergence, its genealogical roots, its apparatus of power, and its discursive formations. Ooh. What is sexology, if not the latest permutation of what I once called biopower? That mechanism of governance which operates not through sovereign decree, but through the subtle, insidious management of life itself, bodies, populations, and our desires. So I'm going to stop. Now I'm no longer Foucault on my. So his argument was that sexology hasn't been around forever. It emerged at a particular time and started to emerge, and then it got consolidated and became a discipline, a profession, and also that for most of human history, as far as I'm aware, the rulers didn't care about our health. They didn't care about our sex life. They didn't care about the food pyramid. They didn't care, about the mindfulness and all this stuff. So that's where the term biopower comes in, where the rulers became more and more interested, not just in protecting their territory and getting their tax or their tithe or enough soldiers, but actually trying to govern actual bodies and desires and populations and all that. So this comes with use of surveys and the emergence, or he would probably say birth, of various government and non-government institutions. So the Ministry of Education, the Ministry of Health, the Ministry of this, the Ministry of that, is what he's getting at here. So now I'm back to Michelle. Let us not begin with the false assumption that sexology, as it presents itself, is a neutral or purely scientific endeavor. No, its birth is steeped in the historical project of regulating bodies and regulating pleasures. It arises at a moment when sexuality is no longer confined to confessionals or moral imperatives, but becomes an object of medical inquiry, of measurement, categorization, and indeed normalization. And I'm going to pause and be myself again. So when he says like control and discipline, oftentimes that has negative connotations. But if you could think about, I remember when growing up, and I'm sure Tanya, you saw this too. You remember when all the women's magazines, whether it be like Cosmopolitan or Vogue and all this stuff, you were totally getting the message that your sex life needs to be banging all the time, or there's something wrong, like 10 ways to pleasure your guy and this and that. Very new. And so this, you can also regulation isn't always a no. It can also be a yes. It can be an encouragement to, liberate, to explore, to, articulate, figure out what your gender identity, all kinds of stuff. But that there's a logic, a governing logic behind it. So back to Michelle. So the birth of sexology and the medicalization or standardization of desire. So much like the clinic I analyzed in the birth of the clinic, sexology constructs its gaze. And those of us who have gone through humanities or some social science will know that the gaze is very popular. There's the masculine gaze. Yeah, there's the patriarchal gaze. And there's also, I would argue later, the sexologist gaze. So it's not merely concerned sexology constructs its gaze. It is not merely concerned with the body as a site of illness or of bad or good sexual experiences or performance, but also the body as a site of pleasure and danger. So the sexologist gaze is a cousin to the medical gaze, is cast not only on the patient's anatomy, but on their psyche, their behaviors, their identities. It transforms subjective experiences into objects of scientific inquiry and also commodity production. But that's a.
Can I ask a question?
Please.
I've heard Zizek in lectures use that term, and I just want to clarify, when he used it, but it doesn't mean that it's the same thing here. I kind of imagined it as the individual's kind of cognitive fabrication or assumptions of what society expects, like the gaze being so the gaze is sort of something you experience internally, but the way you were talking about it there, it's sort of like something that the controllers are constructing and projecting.
Well, but you internalize it. Yeah. So for example, if I start seeing a nutritionist and a personal weight trainer, even when I'm not in that condition, when I go to break my diet.
I get that.
That's how I understand it. So it's kind of like it's like you've internalized it, so it's kind of like the, in psychoanalytical terms, kind of like a super ego, but it's diversified. So there's more than one.
Okay. But what I'm getting at is like, you're the sexologist or researcher or whatever, the entity, right?
Yeah.
And you're gazing upon and assessing the patient or subject. Yeah. Okay. You see what I mean? Then it's like your gaze as that entity versus the person who's internalized it. Imagine, I get that, right? So is the gaze not just an imagined thing of the individual?
Well, no,
or is the person doing the gaze also aware that they're gazing?
Okay, so this is one way of saying is that the way that a sexologist is going to look at sexuality is different than how an endocrinologist would, or a medical doctor would, or a priest would, or whoever. So it's also about that when I one of the thing if I were when I so when I if I were to be a sexologist, one of the things I learn is how to think and perceive like a sexologist does. That's one of the things you're kind of learning go through the program if it's successful. So in the disciplines that I'm familiar with, they'll talk about, you know, developing your sociological imagination or your geographical imagination. So you learn through the concepts, the constructs, and the body of work. You learn how to look at things, to construct things as a quote unquote sexologist. So you adopt, that's something that you take on. So there's that. But then, of course, but how sexologists construct sexuality and gender identity or all that stuff isn't just limited to their private practice or their discipline. It's branched out as per, you know, non-binary and all this type of stuff. So there's two. They're separate but related, if that makes sense.
Yeah, again, it was just a simple thing. Like, I'm just asking kind of a technical, but I know, like, again, Foucault and all of that is nonsense to me, right? So
yeah,
I'm expecting a rational answer from something irrational,
okay,
right? Which is a problem.
Well,
but I'm just
yeah.
saying, like, does he explicitly say that, you know, the people who, let's say, create society, or by that I mean kind of have an influence, right? Like a like a movie star
Okay,
can have a
if I get
style.
through this, some of it might become clearer.
Okay.
At least not, and my goal isn't to convince you of this way of looking at
No,
things.
no, it's not the convincing. It's just that I
yeah.
thought the gaze was just something that was an internal psychological state. It's kind of like a super ego or something. Do you know what I mean?
Well,
That's
yeah.
what I thought the gaze was. I thought it was
Okay,
just
but
what the
I don't want to
individual imagines.
Again, I don't want to make this. We'll see how it works out.
Yeah.
I don't want to make this an introduction to Foucault, but I'm trying to use him to get at the sexology.
Yeah. Sorry. I thought it was going to be straightforward. I didn't mean to.
No. But let me do this, and then let's put a pin in that, and then of course you can ask, and I'll do my best. Yeah.
Yeah.
I will leave you with one thing. The quintessential example is kind of like the panopticon. Yeah. So the way that you would construct, whether it be a factory or a prison is the ultimate example, you wanted to design in a way where the prisoner or the student or the whoever feels like they're always being watched, even when they're not, well, before CCTV, even though often they're not actually being watched by a human eye or whatever. There's the perception that they're on display, and that affects their behavior. Yeah, it affects their conduct.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's kind of, so there's a design. So that's a purposeful thing. You know, if you're in the prison industry, you have to, you have could you say a prison gaze, or you look at things with that type of design thing, and it affects the people's behavior. But let's see how we do. How you doing, Tanya? Has Tanya left the building?
No. Sorry. I guess I'd muted because I've been sneezing. No, I'm just gazing.
No, it's okay because okay. So all right, so let's go. Okay, so the gaze, and also the gaze, mes amis, is not innocent. It is laden with power. It categorizes, it hierarchizes, defining what is normal and what is pathological, what is good, what is bad, what is healthy, what is not, what's too much, not enough, this type of thing. Whether it be with, in this particular case, sexuality or sexual behavior. So consider how sexologists in the late 19th and early 20th centuries sought to define homosexuality, fetishism, sadomasochism, terms that still haunt us today. These were not mere descriptive exercises. They were acts of subjectification, which means creating identities that could then be governed, studied, and of course, corrected, tantalized, all kinds of things. So the biopolitics of gender identity. But what of today? Today, sexology has evolved or devolved into a central node in what we might call the gender industrial complex, nod to Jennifer Billick. Its practitioners now turn their gaze to gender identities, a terrain that is simultaneously personal and political. We see, for example, the push to destigmatize autogynephilia, What was once classified as a paraphilia is now reframed as an orientation, as a legitimate aspect of an identity. And what does this reframing accomplish? It shifts the train of discourse from pathology to acceptance, demanding not only tolerance, but affirmation. This is not merely an epistemological maneuver, so a shift in knowledge. It is a biopolitical one. It is the conduct of conduct, shaping how society organized its bathrooms, its pronouns, its legal codes, and even its notions of truth. Small t. But do not mistake me for saying this is inherently emancipatory. What we witness in the proliferation of big sister GenderSpeak, that's my term, terms like misgendering, assigned at birth, and non-binary is not merely the liberation of individuals from oppressive norms. It is also the inscription of new norms, new disciplines, new forms of governance that subject us to an endless self-surveillance. And you can think about it in terms of, when you're around someone, like, I don't want to misgender them and all this stuff. And, having to, even now, but before on Twitter, having to constantly self-censor, like, how am I going to say what I want to say without saying words? Are they going to get me in trouble? This type of thing. The explosion of categories and the genderification of life. He says. And here we arrive at what I call the inflation of categories. In the past, there were men and women. Now there are genders, plural, multiplying endlessly like an unchecked currency. Each new category claims to liberate, but also ensnares. The gender identity industry thrives in this proliferation. For each new identity is a new market, a new object of scientific inquiry, a new justification for surgeries, hormones, and therapies. Is this not the ultimate triumph of biopolitics, to convince us that our liberation lies in the infinite parsing of identities, in the endless articulation of our differences, while the structures of capital, well, he probably wouldn't say capital, but these were my notes. Structures of capital and governance remain untouched, unquestioned, and unbroken. So, nearing to the end, people. Sexology's role in the gender industry. And so I returned to sexology, that peculiar discipline which straddles science and advocacy, objectivity and ideology. It is here in this field that we see the clearest example of how knowledge serves power. For every study on branched attraction, and for every paper that pathologizes cisgenderism or celebrates the diversity of sexual pleasure, we must ask who benefits, whose interests are being served, and what possibilities are being foreclosed. Sexologists claim to promote understanding, but understanding is not a neutral act. I think this is important. It is an act of framing, of naming, of defining the limits of what is thinkable, what is permissible, what is, so-called suitable for work, not suitable for work, suitable for public and not. When they advocate for quote unquote gender affirmation, they are not merely affirming individuals, they're affirming an entire apparatus, a nexus of pharmaceutical companies, surgical industries, media campaigns, academic industries. The people are going to come and educate us about, gender diversity and gender expression, what we can ask and not ask. And, this whole thing that's cast as liberation for somebody. And a final reflection. So what do we do with this knowledge? Shall we dismiss sexology as a pseudoscience, as some have? Or shall we critically engage with it, laying bare its assumptions, its contradictions, and its complicities? Let me leave you with this thought. The birth of sexology, like the birth of the clinic or the prison, is not an event, but a process. It continues to evolve, to shape our lives, to subject it to its gaze. But the gaze, mes amis, can be reversed. We can turn it back on sexology itself, interrogating its methods, its motivations. For only by understanding the apparatus can we dismantle it, or at least resist it. So that was my bit of introduction vis-a-vis Michel Foucault, who wrote a lot about sex. And there he is. Hello, Michel. That's a popular photo of him.
Wow, it looks like a mirror image of Vuk.
Yeah.
Look at that.
No.
Hey, Luke.
Look.
Ah,
I'm just joking. I'm just joking.
okay.
I wasn't expecting him to have the office and the books.
It's okay. I also thought about that a bit, but there's another picture.
No, it doesn't look like Vuk at all.
No.
Totally different. More like me, because I've always got my hand on my face. It's me that's mirrored.
he's biting his finger. We don't want to know what's going on below the screen. Anyway, so now, so I'm hoping even those people who aren't familiar with that, just from that brief thing, you can see it's kind of very contradictory, because I can see why this type of thought has been very useful to people who want to promote gendermentalism, or gender ideology, gender identity, that type of stuff. But it can also be used to not totally, but it can be turned around and used critically against it. But anyway, I like this idea of the birth of sexology because it's not that old. I think the first, Money, was it in Chicago? I think it was in Chicago. The John Money was the first Department of Sexology or degree program was set up by John Money, and that must have been in the 60s. Anyway, so on that note, what's your take? Because Vuk is, in addition to being a positivist, he's more than that. But he did his. Well, I'll let you say, because I'll let you tell our audience your background in psychology and whatnot.
Okay. Yes. So, well, technically, or officially, let's say my PhD is in social psychology, but that's because my advisor was a social psychologist and that, but it could easily have been, I could have been granted a thesis in cognitive psychology as well. So it's a mix of the two. And often you get that kind of, interdisciplinary stuff. And my specialization was in the area of social identification. And the way into social identification was mostly thought of and researched was in terms of group identities, right? Mm-hmm. So one of them would be, the sex that you identify with, like religion could be a thing, ethnicity, nationality. Mm-hmm. What I did in my thesis, I wanted to show that, we also identify with individuals. And the most straightforward example of that is kind of the process that you go through, like if you're reading a novel or watching a film, and it's something that everyone understands intuitively. If you say that, I identified with that character, it's even used by laymen, but it was interesting that no one really researched that in psychology, right? The emphasis was always on a group. And I sort of wanted to show, it's kind of the same underlying processes. In my thesis, I kind of examined it in the context of identifying with an individual, but I built my whole case around my experiment saying, well, look, the processes are the same. So as part of my literature review, I, said, okay, this is what we say about groups, but this is how it also can apply to individuals. So ultimately, I guess my choice of specialization and interest has led to my anger with developments in gender identification, because again, I have expertise in identification. Mm-hmm. And so I didn't pursue an academic career for various reasons. And, I was under the assumption about 5-6 years ago, well, we must have made some massive discoveries, like not just in psychology, but some biological thing to justify what's going on, because otherwise it made no sense, right? When I saw the kind of the surgeries, the rush to affirm like kids, I figured, okay, well, like it's impossible that we'd be doing that unless there was some major discoveries that happened, right? And then I
God! Yeah.
no, that didn't happen. So
no, nothing will disabuse you of putting too much trust in experts than this business. I mean,
no, definitely, yeah. And
it's
this is one of the things, like, sort of, it's associated with what we call, liberals. Like, some people say leftists. I don't like to use that because it mingles things that shouldn't be mingled, like identity politics and class politics, right? But so it goes along with the same class of people who also are kind of adamant about, well, trust the science and this and that, right? And then it falls
I'm not a
apart.
biologist.
Yeah. Then it all falls apart here, and again, it discredits leftism, and yeah.
But I wanted to ask you, since you do have you obtained your PhD, I guess, technically in social psychology, but it could have been cognitive psychology.
Yeah, social cognitive.
So, what is your take then on, because you've been I mean, you've had a bit of a turfy experience with this. Not that don't want to identify as that, but you've lost friends over your concerns for this, and
yes.
and so one of the things that I wanted to ask you about, not just in terms of in terms of sexology, or sex research or sexual behavior. I think the journal I looked at today was the Archives of Sexual Behavior Research or something like that. Is what's your take on, given your background, on the responsibility or the culpability or the willful blindness of we'll just say sexology departments and their brethren, their sisters or brothers in sexology?
Well, I mean, I've been
gender.
saying this for like a few years now, that it's a disgrace for all of academic psychology, right? So the realms involved with this, I guess, social cognitive is one, but I mean, we also study evolutionary biology as well. You have to be very knowledgeable about that to get a PhD, right? So I had to read Richard Dawkins, and then there's the clinical side as well. And like, everyone has failed, because again, the reason I made that assumption is like, okay, a whole bunch of stuff must have been discovered to justify this, but no, it just seems there hasn't been any scrutiny, right? So even at a basic, like graduate, any graduate level class that you'd have, if you were discussing this, it would be ripped apart. When you look at the research, you couldn't get a thesis in this, because it's so weak. And so there are a few people. So Bailey is one of them researching this, but others don't want to touch it. And I have friends who are in academia. I've talked to them, and they say, yeah, it's career suicide, right? So you don't want to discuss this. And it's not suicide from your colleagues necessarily, although maybe there could be one or two in certain places, but it's the backlash you're going to get from the student body, right? From activists, whipping up a frenzy. So kind of, they're careerists. They focus on their little domain of research, and like, okay, that's kind of how it is. Like, they don't have broader social concerns regarding their profession. That would be my take on this. But they're responsible for this, and especially the clinical psychologists. Like, they should have said, well, wait a minute, we don't do this again. And I've been trying to think of, in what case do you suggest like a major cosmetic surgery of the body to resolve kind of like internal distress, and distress that you don't really know, you don't really understand the causes of very well, right? So we don't do that. And we've chatted before. I said, for even a person who's never studied psychology, if they've watched a film or a TV show with a psychologist, just like they understand identification talking about a film, if they've seen scenes with a psychologist, you get the notion that you're trying to help the person kind of work through a self-acceptance, right? It's like, okay, yeah, this is it. This is your reality. But look, you know, it shouldn't be that bad. And like, you're a good person. And this is maybe how to think about it, right? How to come to terms with it, right?
Yeah.
And we're not doing that. We're doing the exact opposite of that. And again, I can't think of anything else in clinical psychology where you violate that you know, that principle.
Well, do you want to add anything, Tanya?
Nope, not yet. No.
We're from 3 continents today, 3 time zones. So for one of us, it's bright and early. Anyway, yeah, but I wanted to ask you, because that's the thing, is that in terms of the sexology people kind of taking over on this, is that what I noticed from when I was looking at their articles and some of the books is that it's very observational and very affirming. So this notion that, and again, when it comes into this way of seeing sex, so this idea that somehow it went from gender dysphoria, which is also you know, a sexological term, but also a psychological one. So first it was you know, codified as a disorder. Yeah, or either a paraphilia or, you know, just, you know, so the
and the delusion part. That's important. The word delusion was in there in the DSM. I can't remember then whether it was in the 4 or whatever, but delusion was there.
Yeah.
Okay, as part of the definition, and then it got removed.
Yeah, because there was this push because it was discriminatory. It didn't make them feel good. This kind of affirmation thing. So in terms of to take it back to Fuko, the conduct of conduct, is that how this spread through, whether or not be what you're saying, even at the clinical level, people who should know better, kind of going along to get along. And all of us in our various workplaces or whatever, when you start, the first time you saw people have the pronouns in the email signatures, or you saw this thing about, you know, gender neutral, but you started, and I was like, huh. And then all of a sudden, it didn't take too long before it just became kind of normalized. Like, people have this kind of gender consciousness now, you know, and those of us who are trying to push against it, who haven't been, what I usually say is gender borged, they'd be like, well, why do you care? What's the big deal? You know, it's just nice.
Can I say something?
Go ahead.
Yeah, I think what's important is sort of, we need to sort of not fall into the trap of having kind of very homogeneous perceptions of things, right? And again, I'm not an expert in this, but I have enough experience. And like I said, I even have friends who I didn't know in grad school, but, you know, 2 friends whose wives are therapists, right? And in that domain, it's not kind of like, you know, everyone gets together and discusses things. Even within clinical, it's sort of like, well, I'm a child psychologist, or I help couples, or I deal with schizophrenics or autistic. Like, it's all over the place. So again, it's another one of those where you can kind of pursue your career and ignore this altogether, right? It's not kind of like, well, I'm part of like Cleveland Browns management, and, you know, well, I just deal with this so I can ignore the whole chaos.
No, but if this was just in a particular field or department, but when it became like global, you know.
But I know.
Then
but
you then is it just too late? Then you're like, well, you know.
But it's not. But here's the thing. See, we have, like, we're categorizing people, and we're kind of assuming that, you know, they get together every week in a department and say, hey, you know, well, this gender stuff is in the news a lot, so let's discuss it. I'm saying it's not like that. Everyone, I assume, is also avoiding it there. So you get some niche people and they run it. It's not a clinical consensus is what I'm getting at. It's a few, you know, oddballs who went and ran with this, and then no one could challenge them because of the career pressure, right? And again, not everyone, like, okay, when you're in experimental psychology, which is, to distinguish it from clinical. So I'm from experimental psychology. You're likely to become an academic, right? Whereas if you're clinical, then you go out and practice, right? So then it proliferates outside in private practice as well, whereas there really aren't social and cognitive psychologists doing, research outside of academia. You see what I mean? So there's a distinction. So even there, that again, that's how that consensus just not breaks apart. It doesn't exist to begin with, right?
Okay.
The only time I can give you one example when there was an inkling of that. So remember, like, there was the Enron crisis, and I can't remember, there was another one, right? Like these kind of, unethical accounting practices and that, right? And say, my God, like how did this happen? And then there was something, I think maybe because people saw, well, okay, this is something we can investigate and then maybe build careers off of. So that was one thing where I saw kind of a galvanization inside psychology where everyone was kind of talking about it, right? It's like, oh, look at these big problems companies are having, right? Maybe we can help them out, right?
Yeah. But I wanted to ask you, because let me fast forward a bit here. Oops, sorry. Okay, so kind of critical reflections, because what we were also having some fun with today is I was going through just kind of randomly some of the academic peer-reviewed journals that sexologists or sex studies or sexual behavior, the pantheon of the stuff published in, and I was shocked at how bad it was. And I'm not a positivist by I mean, I can put the positivist hat on, but I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, how does this get through? Because most of what I saw is that people are taking, whether it be cisgender or transgender or now this branched attraction or all this other stuff. All these studies were kind of just affirming the constructs. They weren't interrogating them. And and it just what was your initial take when you're looking over of peer reviewed? And this is a top journal in the people who study sex. So I just wanted to get your your idea.
I can't comment on their journals, right? Like in psychology.
No, but you can comment on the abstracts I sent you.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of laughable, right? I mean, and but if you say that this is a respected peer-reviewed journal, that's like amazing, right? Like it's hard to believe that, but but here's one of the things, again, like you're presenting the topic, there's only so much I can say. I can't kind of comment on this field. And as we said at the outset, remember, it's kind of there's a hybrid, right? And you have these people coming at it from this kind of, sociological culture critique kind of angle. And then you have people like, okay, well, they're researchers in psychology, right? And do this. So like, as an example, I have read Bailey's research.
Okay.
Right? And he's very solid. So there's no bullshit there. You know what I mean? Like he's a serious person and he understands the scientific method in the field, right? So there are no issues in terms of
his methodology.
Yeah. Like, I mean, there's another layer where, we're making ethical decisions, right? Social recommendations. That's something else now, right? That's sort of like a, philosophical judgment layered on top of this, right? But,
well, you can say that Bailey is I'll take your word for it, that his process is strong, but he's all about, it seems he's starting to talk about autogynephilia. And for those who haven't watched this before, autogynephilia is, Ray Blanchard came up with this term, and it's the idea there's two types of transsexual men. One is what they called sissy, that's what they called it, And that was a really effeminate gay men who, for whatever reason, decided that they would have a better, as I understand the work, more successful, more likely to get a man if they present as a woman than because gay men tend to like, not the most effeminate men. And then there was, and this was this discovery, I think, or the big the innovation, as they say in in academia, is that called oligonophiles, which are heterosexual men, and these are ones who usually will quote unquote come out, later in life, oftentimes after having a wife, wife and kids. And these men they like to imagine themselves as women. So they want to have sex with them. They're heterosexual, but they get off on the idea of them of turning themselves into whatever this image is in their head that they covet, which is why we have Eli Lilly or whatever his name is. Whatever that guy's name, an AGP, who he doesn't call himself an AGP, he calls himself an auto heterosexual. And Bailey seems to be of the mind that we should consider autogynephilia is not just so much as not a paraphilia or a disorder, but a sexual orientation, which totally normalizes it. Yeah, and that has effects for people out, not just these guys. So if you say his work is strong, what in his work justifies that?
Well, okay, yeah, that I'm gonna have a conversation with him to say.
Just speculation. I realize you can't put.
But another thing is, and you may have hopefully noticed when I talk about things, I'll rarely use labels. I like to kind of describe things like as simply as possible, right? So even that, like, okay, sexual orientation as a shorthand. I mean, like, okay, like let's say we've got taxonomies of things like, what's a fruit, what's a fish, and all of that. But when you just have two of something, now to suddenly add a third, like, well, why are you doing that? Does that really help us understand it? Because to us, this is so alien to the two sexual orientations, like homosexual, heterosexual. I don't see what's gained in my understanding. It only creates confusion. So that's my take. So like if I were in the department, and sometimes we do have these interdepartment meetings, like we had these, brown bags. So like on Friday, someone had to present something, the graduate students and the profs are there, and we critique one another, right? So I would have been all over that if he presented it. It's like, it creates, it doesn't help me. So I'm an expert, right, in this field, and he's confusing me. So what purpose does it serve? Right?
Very good question. What do you think?
Okay. Right. Well, the purpose it serves is people like that, people who build careers. And I found that, they invent terms for things, right? And then they become recognizable. Oh, yeah, this is this guy's concept, right? Because if you just kind of do your research, explain it in a straightforward way, if you don't have a catchy term, right, people aren't going to remember it, notice it. So that's a problem that even when I was a young grad student, I saw. And this again, I don't know what, like, it's like, again, it's so radical. Why would you say that?
Okay, let's let Tanya chime in here.
Just because I saw Barbara in the chat, so I felt like I had to say something.
Please,
I had to say something that, from a feminist perspective, one of the motivations might be that men sort of like to encourage other men to have sexual gratification in any way that suits them. I mean, it's kind of a, men like that kind of stuff. Men like gender, and they like that. Sorry, I'm not trying to say that you, Vuk, but like, well, why wouldn't he? Why wouldn't he talk about something that makes some men happy? This kind of masochistic, sexy, kinky stuff. That's another motivation, I think. Hopefully, Barbara. I want to see Barbara say thank you for that to Tanya.
Okay, am I the only one that can put the comments on the screen, or can you, Tanya?
I can do comments. I said to Keith, thank good point.
Well,
Okay,
Tanya,
good.
how about
But can you
this?
put them on the screen? Like if
Oh,
this.
no, wait, I can't put up on the screen. Sorry.
Okay.
I can answer,
Tanya,
but I can't.
if I could address that,
Thanks.
you're right. Kind of men are more like crass about sex, right? In some ways, in that. But I think, again, to get back to what I was saying earlier, here I think there's a particular kind of person, and then I wonder about that. Like, if you're going to choose to study this, right? And I did send you a note about this earlier, Tara. Like, it wasn't a joke, right? It's sort of like most people in society, like we're not comfortable with fetishes and sexuality. I mean, the concept, what did I say? Too much information, right? We don't want to know about regular people or people we know and what they do sexually, right? So to me, someone who doesn't have that is kind of odd. I don't mean by odd, I just mean not like everyone else, okay? Distinctive in that. So to say, well, I want to go and study the minutiae of this, right? Right off the bat, So I think a person like that, I mean, they have every right on a logical basis to sort of, question social norms and that. But, their suggestions, like, do they have a good understanding of, at any given time? Obviously, norms can change. What is the feel that everyone else has, right? I think they're outliers. Just the fact that they're studying that makes them outliers, because most people do not want to study that. Right?
Well, I wonder though, because if you look, maybe in the clinical psychology or whatnot, but if you were just to do a search on gender identity and cisgender and transition, whatever, there's been an explosion of academic material on that.
Oh, yeah, but that's a career thing.
Yeah.
That's a career thing, right?
Yeah. So, and also would say that in terms of the apparatus, in terms of the kind of the birth of gender ideology, which isn't just in, there's that's why I used the Fuko term of like this dispotif. There's this whole thing going on that, if you have people who are proudly identifying as furries, and you have all the kind of this culture of constant confession and sharing, and as well as this notion that this notion of talking about sex in terms of sexual health, and sexual well-being, which implies that there's somebody who knows what is sexual health, what are the components to that, what can we sell, what we can do, all this type of stuff. So I would agree with you that traditionally, at least me as well, it's like, I don't really want to know about people's sex life. Unless I'm, having sex with them, might be a different thing. But we could, to say that these are the oddballs, I would say that is to kind of miss the shift. Yeah. So if you have when you have Dylan Mulvaney visiting the president and getting a letter congratulating him on his 1 year of girlhood living authentically from the vice president at the time. So that's the thing about this, that we've been somehow groomed into kind of going along with this and accepting it, having our conduct conducted for what? I don't even know how many people would clinically qualify as having dysphoria if it's one thing. And then what you mentioned, okay, even if we accept that there's this thing called gender dysphoria, why does that then preclude all this other stuff? Like they have to be able to.
Well, how about this?
Yeah, go ahead.
If we go back to the Foucault analysis, right? And what I don't like about this, see, sometimes things happen, right? So we're all actors in society. Some of us have greater powers than others, like they're kind of, converging interests, conflicting interests. And then sometimes, certain things emerge, right? And kind of the Foucault thing, it's as if, well, there are constructors of the gaze because it suits them somehow, right? And I don't think that, like, you've got like trivial explanations, right? It's sort of like, oh, here's the cool new thing, right? It's kind of transgressive.
But you have to look.
And,
You have to. So in terms of the gaze, let me put my Foucault hat on here.
Okay.
So if you want to go from the sexologist gaze to the gender gaze, what is that? So whereas the medical gaze just turned the human body into its parts, yeah? So if you want to have a medical gaze, a surgical gaze, you're not thinking about all the other stuff that goes on into that human. You're just thinking about the body parts and how it works. And so you have that kind of perception, yeah? And that's what goes on in the clinic when you go when you go and visit your doctor, the surgery, or whatever it is. So now the gender gaze, what that does is that in terms from now them for the gender ideology, the gender mentalists, is that gaze separates out gender identity and expression from sex, and all of this rests on that separation. Yeah.
Yes.
So.
Yeah.
So,
but again, I don't think the word gaze
so
here.
That has the debates, it has the language, it has all the stuff that goes in to reifying, to substantiating this notion of seeing people as there's the sex and then there's the gender identity,
Right?
And that doesn't just happen. And I would say that in terms of the role that sexology played, because the first guy who coined this and started to do experiments about, questionably ethical experiments about can a boy be raised as a girl and never be a girl except for certain body parts. So just to be kind of things just kind of happen. It just kind of happened that we have this gender syndrome.
Okay, but what I'm saying, but it did kind of just happen. When I say just happened, I don't mean, well, no one pushed it, right? I mean, sort of, if you look at the people who are now part of, let's say the circle of allies, transgender allies, like that exists, right? But they didn't get together 15 years ago and say, hey, here's how we're going to do this. And
you're straw manning it now, because what it is that it's not like that they had and some people did kind of hatch a plan, but in terms of this cultural social thing, is that, and it's a process. Yeah. So it's not like everybody, I mean, the people can talk to you who don't really think about it too much. And, don't think, well, yeah, we just have preferred pronouns now. We just have this now. And there's trans kids now. And there's this, that, and the other now. And to unpack the genealogy of that, the genealogy of those ideas and perceptions and practices is something you can do. And of course, it would be different. Maybe I would say like in the field that you come from, and the sexologists, and then the more kind of humanities studies people. But let Tanya get in here for a minute. Go ahead, Tanya.
Yeah, that's right.
You guys are going so fast. I think I've lost my tail. I just
bring it down to earth, Tanya.
Bring it down. So I was gonna. I wanted to jump in at gaze, and there's definitely a cultural society, this porn culture gaze. Like we're not. How can we separate Bailey? I don't want to pick him out, but money, and how can we separate these men and say, oh well, they're just totally academic. Maybe they're researching this stuff because they're sexual masochists and they get off on it, and they are definitely contributing. They're definitely contributing to this kind of wild wave of porn culture that is it neoliberal? I don't know. Talk to Alex or someone else about that, but I don't think it's just like. Why is it, why did they come up with this stuff? Nobody likes it. Well, yeah, I think people like it.
Well, yeah, it wouldn't have gotten anywhere if it wouldn't, the idea is like, to study why it got picked up by who it got picked up by, and how it's kind of spread into this kind of, interconnected.
Yeah. All I was getting at, like, again, I started kind of like at an early stage, right? I didn't mean to contest that sort of a kind of a construct or like these big social ideas don't develop, right? I was just saying that, the Foucault thing, as if there's some evil plan, and maybe
no, that's not what he would. That's not how he would characterize.
Yeah, probably not. It kind of sounded, but the main thing I don't like this concept of gaze, right? Because you see the ambiguity. That's kind of like, well, is it the practitioner observing? Is it the individual imagining the observation? Are they imagining the
Yeah, but
observation of the...
yeah, again, we'll have to talk about that offline, because that's a
Yeah. I just think
but
it's
I
a
think
bad
that you
word.
can, I think we can all understand that the way that a sexologist or
Yeah, why don't we just say the way
or
they
Judith Butler
perceive
or
or approach
whoever
it, right?
perceives
Yeah.
and labels and categorizes
Yes.
and gender or
Yes.
the body, that's a type of gaze. Yeah. So,
Yeah, but
and
again,
you can put on, so that's that type of thing. So like I
yes.
said before, is that one, it's like the reason why you think, I could say, you have a clinical psychological gaze that you apply to things, and you weren't born with that. You had some natural skills, but you learned that. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's the type of thing. So for example, if I have a medical, if I'm a gynecologist and I also have a sexology thing or sex studies thing, and someone comes in and they're having, sorry people, vaginal discomfort with sex, yeah, I'm going to look at that. What am I going to look at? I'm like, okay, is there why is it lining? I'll do various medical tests and examination, that type of thing. Now, if I send her out, and then they find nothing wrong, nothing medically wrong, then they might, they think, oh, maybe it's psychological, or maybe it's something with the marriage or whatever. And then they send me to somebody else who's going to have a different approach to
Again, I
sexuality.
understand
That's
that
all this
completely.
means.
Yeah.
But certain ones over time become more dominant than the other.
Yeah. No. Like, I
That's
get all
what
that.
he's saying is, as I think you can also understand, is that if you look at sexuality, we don't have to be a sex expert to know that the way that sex, that's the act, this whole notion of sexuality, sexual health, being concerned about how many orgasms people have, it's historical, So to understand why did that came up and how does it develop how it does and how it relates to social conditioning, whether trying to constrain certain behaviors or encourage certain behaviors, I think is kind of is an interesting thing. So, but I don't want to give people the idea that he's saying there's some sort of, maestro
it came
conducting
across
it all.
a bit like that, but my main objection is, again, I don't like that word gaze. Like, we understand, like, if you say, okay,
well,
a
then you don't
doctor
have to
has
use
this
it, Luke.
perspective. I'm not saying that
use a
different people,
perspective or a perception.
yeah, but I understand the notion of different people have different perspectives. But, and again, maybe like Zizek messed me up, because the only time I've heard someone use that term, aside from you earlier, is him, and he's one of these continentalist crazies, right? And and I know it from Freud as well. So when you talk about gaze, you're talking about the individual imagines some entity looking at them. That's why it's gaze. Like, gaze is not a good word for a doctor looking at you. Gaze is kind of like, you know what I mean?
Well,
it's
then
like
you'll have to, okay, we'll have to put a pin in this, because again, a big part of his, and maybe his book is crap. I know some people think he's crap. I can't remember enough about the birth of the clinic, but a big part of that was the development of the quote unquote medical gaze.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
And so you'll have to go and look at that, and then you can decide if, but I'm not here I'm not here to whatever.
I'm the one with the problem here with this word.
No. Well, this is the
because I
positivist.
imagine something else. And I swear Zizek used it in the sense that I'm saying. Okay.
Well, okay. Again, he's using. Let's not get lost in the woods. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Anyway, so let's see. I wanted to, in terms of the scientific discipline, if I can get this off of here, in terms of, because it has an air of the sexology or sexologist. It has this air of like an aura of of science and expertise and authority.
Mm-hmm.
And when you start to look into it, you start to wonder if it deserves that. I need to. How can I get his comment off the screen? There we go. So I can see this. Yeah. So what I would say is that when I look at this in terms of the science part of it, so the people who publish their So the discipline itself and the people who publish articles in peer-reviewed journals. It definitely seems to prioritize representation and visibility and framing them as inherently progressive while sidestepping critical interrogation of the origins of broader societal implications of these trends. And that the approach leans heavily on observational affirmation rather than analytical rigor. So, and the observational focus, why that's a problem, is that much of the research just documents phenomena and uses the terms that the people the people who are doing the behavior they're observing use, which of course reifies it. It gives it weight that it may not deserve. So they, maybe gender identities or autogynephilia or transsexual this or furries or God knows what else, without critically questioning why these phenomena are emerging, what drives them, and whose interests they serve. So there's a lot of focus on documenting lived experiences because, if it's a lived experience, then I guess who are we to question? Or self-reported data often becomes a form of affirmation, validating existing frameworks rather than challenging them or refining them. And it very much seems very inflationary. And you mentioned that before, Vuk, and from the time I spent in academia, and we were talking about this today, that there's certain fields where things are happening all the time. And there's certain ones, like I'll just use an example, not this, I'll use sexology, why not? But I can also use American literature. So the field of, let's say 19th century American literature, there's only, we're not going to have any more additions to that canon, that corpus. But yet you have universities around the world that are constantly producing graduates in that field. And if you want to go into academia, then you have to publish. So it becomes you have to find a niche. You'll see it in these studies that oftentimes they'll say, well, this is an under-researched area, or this is a gap in our knowledge. And it's like, well, just because that's the case, maybe there's a reason for that. But then you just like, well, that's a gap, so now I have to fill it. And all this stuff goes on. And so I think if I'm a sexologist, I'm sure there's diversity, but there's only so many ways you can do it. And if you're going to want to study something and make a name for yourself, it makes sense that you would look for the marginal. Yeah. And somewhat, more, maybe a bit more provocative. And then with the push in the last 30 years or 20 years in academia, I know the last time when I was filling out a research grant, or also if you're applying for a job, you're constantly asked, okay, what is the likely social impact of this work? Or what is the market impact of this work? It can't just be within the field itself anymore. You have to, so they're encouraging, again, governmentalizing the conduct and conduct to encourage students and researchers to think, okay, what is the social aspect of my work? And if you can affirm somebody, especially somebody is a marginal this or a marginal that or a minority this or minority that maybe now the tide's turning, that's a boon. So it's
funny. Yeah. I was just writing what you said.
So feel free to agree or to push back on that. But I think that's also why we get some of this stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. No. I think, okay, there's something important here. Like I've written it down, and again, like I'm hoping to, become part of like a broader conversation. As I told you, I'm going to write an article. But I think you've identified a third layer, and I'm glad you told me now that this is explicit. I just thought it was implicit, the third one. So the first layer, and again, let's say in the research psychology, we're interested in internal mechanisms, right? Like what's the affect and cognition that leads to a particular behavior, okay? It's just that. In clinical, then you've got this layer of care. It's like, okay, there's distress here, just like in a medical condition, someone has pain. or something, or let's say they've got restricted mobility. Well, in the clinical, maybe they've got restricted social activity, right? And that you want to help them with that. So that'd be the second layer, right? So the first one, kind of understanding internal processes, the mechanisms of thinking and emotion. The second one, helping someone, via what we know, right? It's kind of like the technological aspect of psychology. But then the third one here is now like a social change or social engineering, right? How you're going to affect society. And so you're saying like now it's even explicit, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Right. So you see that's a third layer, and that's what you're identifying in a lot of that, like the way you described. That's when it hit me when you before you said that, when you were describing the sexology stuff, right? The big blatant focus. But in research psychology, where I'm from, we don't do any of that, and you're not supposed to do any of that, right? Like that.
I wonder if that's still the case.
Yeah, I don't know, but that would be kind of frowned upon. Even if you write a thesis, if you go, oh well, this means maybe people now. It's just like it's. Very
I don't know.
dry.
You don't assume. You have to look through the stuff, because I was.
Oh yeah. I'm not assuming.
But I found today, I was like, holy bejesus.
I'd be surprised. I'd be surprised if it infiltrated.
If things get in a peer-reviewed whatever, it adds a weight to it. Yeah. And so it's just, and then and I mean, if you think about sexology, and again, we're talking about the different things, it's like if sex becomes an object of analysis and an object of intervention, that people are concerned about people's quote unquote sexual health and sexual well-being and, all this stuff, we can see, we see it all around us. Yeah. And so then it becomes something that you have to, and then you start thinking about it. Yeah. Like, you start feeling guilty, like, well, maybe, are all these women having orgasms every time they have sex, and I'm the only, there's something wrong with me. Because not just because it's sexology thing of the sexual health or whatever, but like I said before, like all this stuff from the wellness, and that used to be just the magazines, you're constantly getting the message that, you got to optimize your sex drive, or you're missing out, there's something wrong with you or whatever. That, and of course that, again, I don't know what kind of word you want to use, but that way of starting to think about, I'll just use myself as an example, not that I'm plagued by this, my sexuality or my sex life, to abstract and look at it that way. That is a way of perceiving it. And that didn't come from me. It came from internalizing from a variety of different sources, the way that sex and sexuality and women's sexuality and sexual health started being I don't know what you want to say, discussed, constructed, sold in the broader culture. And sexologists, of course, I'm the only thing in this, but I focus on them because, again, it's where gender identity came from. And when I was looking through not the sexologists who are teaching the master's course, but the practitioners, and again, most of them aren't licensed because it's not a regulated thing unless they're actually, doing, you want to prescribe something, they have to have a different degree. And a lot of it was about, again, this optimizing that, but also all of them also had to help people articulate and explore and accept and affirm their gender identity. It's one of their menu items now with sexologists. Yeah. And what that does when you have the ist on there is, again, it reifies this notion that there is this thing called gender identity, that even if I say I don't have it, I do. I just haven't figured it out yet, or haven't articulated, or maybe I've internalized this or the other. And so I think that is an important part to get at. But then when we actually go and look at the fine work by academics, sexologists, or I guess clinical sexologists, and you're like, it's just, the sample size is low. They're assuming what they should be proving. And I want to ask you a bit about, because of your background and your thesis, what you make of their constructs. How logical and robust are the other constructs they use when they, and just if nothing else, just the few things that I sent you today.
Well, how about the biggest construct here, which
Yeah.
is like gender identity itself, right?
Yeah.
And well, like what is the construct? And then you've got that interplay, right, where the
I'm sorry,
what
can I,
ends up.
Vuk, make sure that, can you just say what you mean by construct?
Well,
What
I'm
does it mean to say that gender
okay.
identity is a
Well,
construct?
we've talked about this before. Like we
Yeah,
sort
but
of like,
not,
let's
but
say you're going to
physical.
measure
Yeah.
something,
Yeah.
right? Like that's what we do in science.
Mm-hmm.
You kind of you start with like an operational definition of it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or an operationalization. So like a construct like IQ can be a construct,
Mm-hmm.
right? If you kind of assume some kind of, I'm not big on personality, but there are people who study it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So introversion can be a
Mm-hmm.
construct. In motivation, you could have like achievement motivation can be a
Mm-hmm.
construct, right?
Okay.
And then you say, all right, well, how am I going to measure this? And then how am I going to assess that I've measured what I intended to measure, right?
Mm-hmm.
So even if I can repeat my measures, what do I then predict out in the real world, or as a first step, correlate with something else to make sure, yeah, this is what I intended to do.
Okay.
And so one of the things when we do experiments in psychology, like one of the key things is that you don't want the person to know what you're measuring, because then you've polluted it with
Mm-hmm.
self-presentation. So that's
Yeah.
like the number one thing
Mm-hmm.
in research, right?
Mm-hmm.
So like so that's why like self-report is just like, it can be used as a preliminary tool or something, but if you're really trying to figure something out,
Mm-hmm.
you can't rely on that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And again, in psychology, a lot of it, especially social psychology, is all these revelations of how like our folk wisdom is bad, how our judgment of probability is bad, how our evaluation of people's behavior, like the motivations of it, is bad, right? All of that, right? So you see what I mean? Like we're cynical
Mm-hmm.
about all this stuff, and then suddenly you get to a point where, oh, well, this person identifies as a gender. Now, it's hard to do, like, again, what's so tough, like sometimes you want to have some killer analogy, but this is so kind of unique, it's tough to make a perfect one, but just the stab at it would be like, well, you're doing some kind of assessment to hire people or whatever, and your measure of IQ is, well, Tara, rate yourself on a scale of 1 to 200 as to how intelligent you are, right?
198.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Okay, but come on, you're making my example fall apart by
Okay.
negative here, right?
Okay.
But
So
you see
no,
what I
I
mean?
would probably. So I'd probably say 125,
But
130.
let's say you were applying for a job, right? Like you'd overestimate that, right? And then a guy like Patrick Bet David, he thinks he's really smart, right? So, but you see what I mean? It's not legitimate, right? Now, of course, with the present self-presentation, there are limits to it, right? Like with the IQ, like how much are you going to fake that one, right?
Yeah.
But
In
things
terms of
like
gender identity, what makes gender identity a bad construct? Because it can't really be measured,
because
or it's not.
it's just, well, what's the assessment? What is it? How have you validated it, right? How do you know that 50 people who say something, who present their gender identity, are doing it for the same reasons, right? And then we know, like, it's obvious in this, like, there's no point debating in this. Anyone who knows anything in social science, who's like looked at numbers or whatever, knows there's a social contagion going on, right? There's no question about that. So clearly we have at least 70, my guess is probably higher than 90% of cases that are something that's totally different from what we would have been diagnosing 30, 40 years ago. Okay? That's pretty clear.
Mm-hmm.
And instead of trying to study this, like, well, what's going on? We're not allowed to, because then suddenly it's like, well, even though this thing allegedly requires all kinds of medicalization for treatment,
Mm-hmm.
you're not allowed to medicalize it as the kind of a gatekeeper of entry, right? You know?
Mm-hmm.
So what can you do? You see, your hands are tied at that point, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you've accepted that, if you've accepted it, you know, with the little or no evidence that we have, right, that it's kind of something like homosexuality,
Mm-hmm.
right? And we've also accepted that, well, this is the best way to treat it, is to affirm it, right?
Yeah.
And even there, you can't say that unless you've tried every single thing. How do you know? And also, when your research has to do with pre-social contagion cases, is that relevant now to these people, right?
Yeah.
Right? There's so many, like I said, if we were honest about it, you know, you could have all kinds of great research into this, right? But we're not.
Yeah.
And therefore we don't, right? Because
Yeah.
if any of the things I said, like if I was, you know, if I were at a university and said, oh, this is what I'm going to study, like it would be chaos, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, I don't
Right?
think it'd be. Yeah, it's affirmation only. Yeah. Now
Yeah, like it's in the
yeah,
law in Ontario. Like, so if
yeah.
you go to see a psychologist, like they can't explore other kind of therapy,
Mm-hmm.
right? So not just self-report, like the self-report of a 14-year-old, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know, or younger, right? Like how young are the kids now that they take in? I can't. Uh,
Yeah. So that's the other thing that goes into this idea that's kind of been this you know this way, or that it's become acceptable, this notion of sex and gender being separate, that it's gotten to the point where you can't even a psychologist isn't supposed to say anything but, okay, well, yeah, let's explore your maleness if this is a girl coming in saying she's a boy or whatever. But I think let's should we do a bit of a case study and bring Tanya in here on autogynephilia, in terms of to look at this in terms of the birth of sexology, and to get a better example of kind of how it works and the role that it plays in the kind of the broader gender industry. So I bring this up because autogynephilia again is in turf town. There's a big battle going on between people like, well, actually, I'll let Tanya describe it. Tanya, can you just say a bit about what's going on vis-a-vis the gender criticals or the GenSpec people who want to explore and understand autogynephilia better, and the ultra position?
Right. Well, there's this kind of broad GC, right? They say gender critical.
Mm-hmm.
Gender critical. So you can be GC for any reason, and it doesn't necessarily make you an ultra, which would probably be a turf who is just saying no, we don't need to study it. It's all driven by porn, and we don't want to expand the industry. We want to shut it down. We want to see
Yeah.
the end of genderism. So GC doesn't necessarily mean that, doesn't necessarily mean that they want to see the end of genderism. And ultras truly do want to see the end of genderism.
Mm-hmm.
And so a lot of, and then GC could mean anything, basically. Like even people pretending to be the opposite sex call themselves GC. So it could honestly mean anything. It's so broad, it's totally meaningless. So
So for people like Blair White and Buck Angel, they are gender critical because they don't go around saying that they don't deny the fact that Buck Angel doesn't deny the fact that he's a female, and Blair White doesn't deny the fact that he's male.
He's a boy. Yeah.
But they they say they believe in the medical or the mental health issue of it, transsexualism back in the day. Right. Anyway,
so the GC is it seems to me that they have sort of okay, so the drivers of the genderism of the gender industry, right? The billionaires, the tech billionaires, they've kind of overstepped. I think Barbara in the chat mentioned Dentons, and they had a plan to infuse to get genderism everywhere, to corrupt everything with genderism, and I think they've overstepped, and they're kind of pulling it back now. And it seems to me that they are using the sexologists and all of that to say, okay, no, look, we got it under control now. We've got some people studying it. It's going to be fine, right? We've got
guardrails,
biologists, right? And we're going to take care of it. So ultras are, and GenSpeak has platformed. I know they say they haven't, but you can just go do the Wayback Machine on the internet and find it. They've platformed all sorts of kind of deviants, like this Illy guy that you mentioned, who's written a book about not only being a self woman lover, but he's also into bestiality, and he's just, we don't even want to mention.
There's a good project for a sexologist. Can animals consent?
Right.
Sorry.
But they keep interviewing.
I don't want to give anybody any ideas. Go ahead, Tanya.
It seems like they really want to insert themselves into politics and the general sort of zeitgeist. I hate that word. I don't think I'm pronouncing it properly, but they really want to get this kind of, okay, look, we're on it. We're taking care of it. These are some really smart men, and they're really great, and they know they're men, and they're totally not stepping on your boundaries, and they can't help it because it's just the way they are. It's just so that's what I would say. And ultras are not having any of it. They're saying, look at Bailey. We can't trust Bailey. He had a sex machine demonstration with an actual woman in front of some students. Like, what does that tell you about the rigors of academia? I don't know. Ultras are saying no. I mean, and then, feminists are supposed to, real feminists, not liberal feminists, not the ones that, are like, my name is Mrs. Carter or Mrs. Beyonce Carter, not like that. But the real feminists are supposed to want to not partake in any gender. We call ourselves gender abolitionists, right? We don't want to say, oh, you're a woman, so you have to have these women roles, and you're a man, so you have to have these man roles. It's just be human, right? Like no sort of default human roles, and no stereotypes to play into. We don't want any kind of stereotypes to rule our lives. So that's an ultra kind of position, I would say. But I don't know, maybe you have the ultras who are very religious too. I guess ultra just means anti-GenSpeak at this point.
Well, I like Karen Davis is great, because she's just like, what's with all these sexologists? She was like, they're AGP simps and pedo simps and pervert simps and all this stuff. And I think where she's getting at is that, and I think that Bailey would say that it's almost like they think like raising awareness or understanding is a neutral act. It's not. Yeah. I don't go around raising people's awareness or saying, oh, we have to understand all this marginal stuff. It's like, well, why?
Yeah, that's a good point. It's not neutral.
Again, if it was, yeah. So to get into so thank you for that.
What's coming in under the guise of the second layer that I talked about, or maybe layer is not the right word, but the clinical care. It's sort of like, look, these people are suffering because of this. And then, the cliche, well, if we understand it better, we can help them. But I'm not convinced that the research being done is, because see, the kind of research that you do, just like I said, you have to be kind of dispassionate. It's sort of tough, right? That you're dealing with a human, right? And sort of, especially if you have to discuss it with them, right? To kind of dissect that and rip it apart. So I'm not convinced that, the research is being done. Because again, here's the one thing that's not clear to me is, if this is like the AGP is a fetish, why does it have to be manifest like all day long? Okay. And then, because all of us, like, especially like men, when we're younger, like we restrain all kinds of impulses, right? Like there's aggression in addition to sexuality. There's all kinds of stuff, right? You don't act everything out. and you have a sense of society. And that's the one thing I ask them, well, do they not know that this is not, you know, looked upon kindly, right? That it looks weird to people. Like, what are they accomplishing? So again, all of those questions, I don't understand if you've studied this that long, that it's just like, you know, the answer is, well, we don't know what's going on in their minds. Okay.
Yeah. Well, yeah,
Right.
it's like, how many
So,
questions,
well,
how many
that
normal
means then
questions can there be?
maybe you should stop studying it then. Like if there's been that this much time and you don't understand, then it does turn into a promotion. Like, you know, and you know what's implicit in this? It's like, you know, well, why aren't you kind of like a you know, an open-minded progressive people? Why does this bother you that this person wants to do this or whatever, right? You know, it comes down to that. And but again, and has anyone answered? This is what I don't get. I mean, the level of scrutiny, right? That we produce when there's a film in which something stupid is done or a plot inconsistency, like in Game of Thrones or whatever, right? People are all over it. So I'm wondering, when Phil shows up in that like blue velvet cocktail dress or whatever the hell you want to call it, right? That's like totally inappropriate. So if he's trying to be a woman, like, is he unaware that a woman would not dress like that, right? Like, I know people pointed out a woman would not dress like that, but did anyone discuss, well, what, like, Phil, well, why did you wear that? Why didn't you wear like a, you know, like a Hillary Clinton pantsuit or something?
Yeah.
Or
Well,
Kamala
because he
Harris
wants to be a
pantsuit?
sex object, to be my guess. But again, an ultra position would be like, I don't care. Not my problem. Not a woman, any kind of woman. That's a dude thing.
Yeah, but if you want to attack it scientifically, it's like, well, why is this not being assessed, right? You know, and how about these ethics, right? So imagine you're like a clinical psychologist, and you tell someone, just, you know, go out there like this. Like if you know someone's making a fool of themselves, right? Wouldn't you want to kind of tackle that and address that, you know? So if someone's wearing a propeller hat going outside, right? You tell them, hey, I know it makes you feel like this and that, but that's not how people see it, right? Where are those aspects? Where are those discussions, right? You know,
we're full affirmation. Well, yeah, and Tanya and I have talked about this before when this topic comes up, is that when you look at their own material, psychologists, and they're assessing somebody who comes in with we'll just say a paraphilia, one of the things they try to understand is like, okay, is this causing this person, if they're not able to function, you know, like have a basic life, so, you know, be relationships or work or whatever. That's one thing. And the other one is how it affects other people. Yeah. So, but it seems that for some reason that second part has totally gone out the window. It's just solely focused on what is affirming or, you know, whatever for these people, which is, of course, makes sense why they would take it on to gay rights, because it's like, well, you know, we have gay rights, now we have trans rights, all the same thing. It's like, what? As if pretending that men can, that there's, again, we come to this all the time here, that there's male women and female women and male men and female men. It's confusion, it's chaos, it's just not, it's just, you know, it's just problematic. And I think that we've turned the corner on, there's that hit the limit of just, well, be nice, it's fine, it's fine, it's fine. It's like, well,
Tanya,
but again, I don't understand. I don't understand why they can treat this. Well, I knew there's money in it. So there's money and there's a sexual gratification and and certain male sexual proclivities that get, you know, that are kind of the libidinal machine to a lot of this. But just from your point of view, looking at it clinically and from a position of care, it'd be just like affirming an anorexic. You know, it makes just as much sense.
Yeah,
so,
but
well,
again, remember, analogies are so difficult here.
You'll die sooner if you're confirming an anorexic. But it's like, oh yeah, fine. And then all the negative sides and all the tomfoolery, and it's just like, it's and again, I appreciate what you're saying is that I mean, there's no shortage of stuff to research on this, but the people who would be able to do it, you know, the funding isn't there. They're scared to, because they don't want to get, you know, out as a reactionary, transphobe, far right fascist, etc., etc. So it's left for us to kind of fumble our way through it.
Okay, but let's say a sexologist, I'm not talking about Bailey, right? I'm talking more, again, when I said these things, when I looked at those topics and things that you sent me, right? Like I wonder, right? So let's say you have someone who has a fetish for fetishists, just, right? For convenience here, right? And they're looking at this. I mean, like, that's going to affect how they deal with this, right? And how they imagine everything and go, yeah, this is plausible. This is okay. That's their own value judgment affecting. But Tanya, what I wanted to ask is kind of what the point that you raised here. Like, I'm sort of, there's so many ways to tackle this. Like, what I want to do is demolish gender. I want to say it's a meaningless, useless concept. That's my number one. That's the thing I can contribute. But I'm kind of curious, and I see where you are. I see sometimes, like, this has turned into a political battle, right? So sometimes you say, okay, you know what? With honest actors, approaching it like this and, kind of the scientific way is the right way. But is that the correct way? Because like you said, well, you're fed up with this, right? And it's like, why do we have to do this fine-grained scientific analysis for something that's so absurd, right? So is your opinion that maybe, like, would I be wasting my time, approaching this with like, detailed scientific critiques within the realm of psychology? And then maybe it's just better to focus efforts on kind of the broader political feminist realm.
No, I don't think you're wasting. I mean, I don't think you would be wasting your time, because this is something that, it's a personal thing. You're so good at it. You can think this way. I don't know if, and TERFs will use what you come up with. We will use what you come up with. I mean, if it serves our political goals, why not? So no, it's not a waste of time. The cat is out of the bag.
All hands on deck, Vuk.
Yeah. Okay.
And what I would say is that, again, it's because this thing is so monstrous now that it's hard and I appreciate you bearing with me, that if we just want to talk in terms of clinical psychology and the science of it and what's gone on there, because I think that one of the times that we've been talking about, I'm like, what would be useful to me is like, what would the kind of studies look like that should have been done that weren't done?
Okay.
To me, that's good, because you can combat it, because people say this, even though if you look behind the hood, there's not much there. But there's this, especially the advocates of the useful idiots, they think there's all this science and knowledge behind it. Like when we looked at WPATH, like, oh, this looks great. And then you look at it and you're like, holy shit, this is like, it's the manufacture of expertise and authority. And so the thing is that given that what wasn't done, to me, that would be interesting. Like if you kind of, I mean, if you don't want to get it in an academic journal, you have more freedom for how you frame it. But like, this is what should have been done, or how. So if you have, especially not in terms of the sex inside sexology, we have gender identity and all this stuff. But once this thing started to rise its head, and you start thinking like the trans kids thing, and you're hearing about puberty blockers and, codifying gender identity in law. Be like, if you were, let's say, at Michael Bailey's position instead of him, what kind of research would you want to have done? What kind of PhDs would you want to have had? I think that would be really useful. Go ahead, Tanya.
Right. And we don't have enough people who represent the side of the clinicians and the academics. We don't have enough people who are willing to not say words like trans women, who are not willing to concede our language, who are not willing to give them something. So I mean, if you give them nothing, then that's excellent. Give them nothing.
It's not earned. Yeah, it isn't. They just
like we have few on we have the Miriam Grossmans, right? Dr. Miriam Grossman. We have some who really hold the line, really hold kind of an ultra position. Like, I'm not going to call this man a trans woman. I'm not going to I'm not going to flatter his fetish. We have a lot who are kind of like, right? Like Blanchard and Bailey and Deborah So, and I'm not going to name them all, but sure, they're all kind of doing.
Well,
Like,
they use the language. They use the language, and every
language.
time you use the language, even if you know what you mean, you're reifying this notion that there is this thing called gender identity. It's so important that all this stuff is necessary and fine and good.
Here's one of the problems, the biggest problem I find. See, and in the experimental realm, right? Well, there are no limits here, and there I can say, okay, this is what's wrong. But you see, the problem is, like, Blanchard and Bailey are kind of the only ones there, right? So it would just be a question of kind of looking at what they do and saying, well, what, why is this not being investigated? What are your hypotheses about this or that? The problem becomes when you get into the clinical realm. So let's forget the AGPs. Let's just say, they're postulating that there is a legitimate gender dysphoria, and kind of, even though the research doesn't support it, I don't understand why we keep maintaining this. It's like,
There you go. That's what you could contribute, is trying to shake this notion that this acceptability. If you say, well, they have gender dysphoria, and people are like, oh yeah, gender dysphoria.
Yeah. So again, how are they measuring it?
Huh?
How are they measuring it? Is there a standard?
You'll have to figure that out. We're not a positivist. Yeah, you'll have to.
But I mean, you have to say, but even clinically, right? You have to say, well, in order to diagnose someone, this is what you have to do. Now again, here's the big problem in this one, right? It's a different bar in clinical psychology, and they're not as rigorous.
Yeah, but you're going to be writing for it. Theoretically, if you want your writing to be something that the gender criticals and the TERFs take up, that's a different writing thing. You could have two versions. Yeah, if you want to have.
No. I wasn't talking about my approach to writing. I was just saying in general what the problem is here in terms of the overall discussion, right? Because there's kind of pursuing understanding, but when they say, well, look, this person is really suffering, and if we start preoccupying ourselves with refining diagnosis, you know what I mean? We're letting them suffer.
And I think some of them aren't suffering. So, but if you want to get your fake boobs and your Adam's apple trimmed and the full gender kit, and you want your insurance to pay for it, you got to have something.
Yeah, there's a lot of iatrogenic illnesses that could be classified as suffering from, the want of not wanting them to suffer initially.
From my fat ass.
Right? Got age dysphoria. I'm suffering all the time.
I'm ass dysphoric. I don't like how my butt looks.
but one thing, I said this as a joke.
I'm under distress.
I know I said this as a joke, but like, I'm dead serious. Like, let's say someone said, okay, like, we're going to trial two therapies, and we're going to use kind of these women, like teens on Reddit, okay, who are saying this and that. Like, let's say the females, right, on Reddit, who on the, what is it, the FTM, right?
Yeah.
Again, I'm not joking about this, but you've seen that show, like What Not to Wear, right? There was an American and an English version of it, right?
Yeah.
I really think that if you said, okay, here's a stylist, they know fashion, we're going to do your hair, like you're doing stupid shit, that's why you look bad and whatever, we're going to get clothes that fit you. Like, I seriously think that
they just need they just need an extreme makeover. They don't need a gender.
Yeah, no, I know it sounds silly, but I really think
could be.
I really think, because a lot of people do, I mean, it's not just that they don't have a good aesthetic judgment. They're all kind of, psychological barriers to that, right? You know what I mean? Like, you don't even dare try, because then what if you try and you get it wrong? And how it is, right? And those people, they're stuck wearing the same kind of whatever for like 30 years in their life. I mean, you'd see that in that show, right?
Yeah.
But why not explore something like that, right?
Yeah, hey, no, I'm for anything that, especially where minors are concerned. I think you should be doing anything and everything before you decide that you have to, block the puberty. And
I know, but
especially since it's not based on any evidence. Tanya wants to say something. Go ahead.
Look, I don't know if you know this. I'll just give you a quick, without talking about my personal life too much. I know that there is a cohort of children who are, I don't know if they still are. You see, it's kind of a fad, who were up until like when the last time I checked was a couple of years ago, who were calling themselves gay arsonists. These are the kids who have identities, and none of them is gay. Not one is gay, and not one is an arsonist. And those two things mean nothing. But they're calling themselves. They were young teens, and they were all calling themselves on this school board website gay arsonists, and it's because it's a fad. And so when they get to go on the school board website and type, "I am a gay arsonist, be gay, do fires," even though it makes no sense, and their parents are just like, "Well, that's stupid, and I'm not going to even bother," it gives them a sense of power. So these kids who get to type in, "My pronouns are ding dong," right? That's power. You have to call me ding dong. So every single kid is different to every single guy who's fathered 5 children and decided he was a woman all along, and he really only can relax what he's wearing. So I think it's a great and novel idea, but there's going to be a lot of be prepared to meet a lot of people who
I wasn't saying that I want to I'm just saying I'm giving one example of like, has anyone tried this? And as absurd as it sounds, it's less absurd than taking the skin off someone's arm to make like a,
Well, it depends on what the incentives are, because it's not, because again, there's been this shift for the people who still want to consider it a mental illness, so gender dysphoria. And then there's the thing that, no, we just all have this gender identity, and sometimes it doesn't align with what we were assigned at birth, and we should be able to express that however we want, and no one should have a problem with it. It's not, that's why they went after Blanchard and Bailey. Because it was making it seem pathological, or like it was and this is just just like me, like you wouldn't do that to homosexuality. We should have learned our lesson. So how can you dare do it to this?
I think Jennifer Billick might say that there's so much money involved in having, the surgeries and the medicalization, and that it's serving a different end. It's, serving like womb transplants and who knows. I don't even.
Sky's the limit, baby. Sky's the limit.
So I mean, these are not the kids who call themselves gay arsonists, right? They're not gonna. And
the incentives are not to treat this anymore. That's done. Now it's to understand and affirm and support and get the right medical care, and at least it could. We'll see how if the pendulum starts to correct a bit. And I know that Tanya has a theory, and it could be right that we look back and it seems like first there was this really overreach, and not to go back to what it was before, but just some sort of middle ground. And that's why you have these kind of reasonable trans women, or reasonable male women coming out now, like, well, okay, well, sports, that's and this is that, but they want to find this middle ground. Like there can be a middle ground between or a functional, especially when we bring this society and culture into it, like it's going to work to have female women and male women. I mean, that are equally women, that have equal claim on woman and womanhood and mother. That's the end goal for some of this, and they're explicit about it. That's what inclusion means. That's what trans rights mean. So to deal with that, that's one issue. But if you want to just focus on your neck of the woods, the clinical part, and how, like, okay, if you were the way that you would say this should have been, what made sense to you to approach this issue when it started.
Well, how about this? The diagnosis part, not the clinical treatment. But, because there it doesn't differ from the research thing. It's like, okay, I'm trying to assess this. I'm trying to measure this. How do we measure? But just one quick thing, so I don't forget this, because I'm gonna have to go in a bit. I saw there was a video that popped up on YouTube, and it was I think on ITV, like a little interview between Helen Joyce and then what's that person's name? The Hayden, is it, or
Hayden? Oh, I know.
The Open AGP, whatever.
Okay. Oh,
with
Hayden. Oh, Debbie Hayden.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. And again, like I'm wondering why, like the thing I can't get past, right? Like if someone were dressed up like Napoleon, right? And to me, it's like equivalent of, but why are you doing so? You say you're mad, like why you're, and especially at that age, right? How old is he? Like 60?
No, he's in his 50s.
Pretty old.
He's pretty old, so you don't have that teenage reckless sex drive. So if it's tied to, what's the point of this? Like that's the thing I don't understand, even in their own words. Like, have any of them justified it? Why do you need to do it outside of the bedroom?
Well, you'd have to go
That's
back.
what I don't understand.
Yeah.
Right?
Do you think that the lack of losing your, and I don't know if this is his case, but so as you age and you lose your sort of teenage sex drive, is it possible that you start to get off sorry, you start to experience these things not in the regular, let's make children kind of way that he had before. Again, I shouldn't be using him particularly, poor guy, but can we move that sex drive from being like vigorous and normal and young to being perverted? Like, is that what happened? Like he just kind of
see, it's not a moving, it's a disappearing of sex drive, right?
Is it because he's probably influenced by, that there's a huge porn genre of forced feminization?
I'm aware of that, but what I'm saying is this is not like a matter of speculation. Let's put a pin in
the Debbie Hayden thing, because he's gone on a lot of things, and he considers himself an autogonophile. So, and he's been quite explicit. So you can go and listen to what he has to say, but he's talked about that at length, both on several podcasts. Yeah,
as to why he needs to do it all day long.
Well, yeah.
I don't think he said why he needs to do it all day long.
That's what I'm looking for here, right? Like that's the obvious question.
He had breasts made. How can he hide that all day long? Like he's grown his hair long. He can't hide that all day long. Like he has to do it all day long, whether he wants to or not, right? Like I don't know. Like maybe these guys go home and they put on their men's Wranglers and they put on, and they act like men.
Mm-hmm. That's not what the trans widows tell us, though. No. So very quickly, if we can, and then we'll wrap it up. I wanted to go through again to talk about the sexology and sexual studies, sexologists, in terms of autogonophilia, to kind of highlight what if you put your Foucauldian hat on, how this presents it and becomes it shows that we're getting that it's doesn't have much to do with what we know, material reality and scientific process and whatnot. So there's this push to destigmatize autogonophilia. Yeah, just like there was a push to destigmatize and change how we understand sex and gender. And also trans non-binary and all this kind of stuff. Yeah. So the conduct of conduct, that's what Foucault was trying to get with his term governmentality. So as the conduct of conduct refers to the ways in which institutions, professions, and disciplines shape how individuals govern themselves and others. So sexology exemplifies this concept by seeking not just to analyze or document human sexuality, but to normalize, regulate, guide, direct, affirm, etc., etc. Attitudes towards complex, often controversial phenomena like AGP and autogonophilia, and maybe even MAP now, like what is it, minor attracted people, they want to call it, and they want to make a distinction between pedophiles who have actually acted out their whatever. There's also talk of, is that an orientation? And you can see the slippery slope here. So AGP, there's a thing about, is it a sexual orientation? And if to get back to the measure, like what we have to operationalize what that meant in a clinical set, in Vuk's neck of the woods. what we meant by that construct, and then how would we be able to see, like, what does this have in common with what we understand sexual orientation to be, which would be heterosexual, bisexual, or homosexual. I know gay people have an issue with bisexuality, but I mean, not all of them, but have a thing like, yeah, okay, you have a preference. But anyway, neither here nor there. So recent moves by sexologists and sister fields to reframe AGP, a paraphilia where men are sexually aroused by the thought of themselves as women, as legitimate sexual orientation, illustrate how this machinery of the conduct of conduct, what Foucault would say, his term governmentality, operates. This reclassification attempts to destigmatize AGP by embedding it within the language of identity and orientation, shifting its public perception from a disorder or a fetish to just a natural variation of human sexuality, that we were just kind of too prudish, or we were too binary, and so it was too suppressed, but it's just, just another one to add on to the spectrum. And if you're libertarians, which I guess some of these people are, I'd be like, okay, well, as long as there's consent and nobody's being, it's not against the law, whatever. I'm not looking at it beyond the individual wanting to do this. So in the normal, it's just a few more things, and then I'll get we'll each go around and say what we think about this, and then we'll wrap up. So normalization through expertise. So by positioning themselves as experts, sexologists aim to guide public understanding, promoting AGP as something that society can accept, not just tolerate, but affirm. So destigmatization is a strategy. So framing AGP as a sexual orientation would remove it from the realm of pathology and place it within the framework, a protected framework of LGBTQIA, etc. identities. This reframing uses the moral capital associated with acceptance and inclusivity to demand validation and to get mad when you don't get it. So again, why is my mouse not working? In terms of biopolitics and the body, the destigmatization project goes beyond conducting, trying to change societal attitudes. It redefines how individuals govern their own lives and desires by treating AGP as a sexual orientation. So the biopolitical focus, to use, if we wanted to apply that term to this, shifts from regulating behavior to regulating acceptance, creating a culture where dissent or critique can be framed as phobic or bigoted or puritanical or nosy or whatever it is. Individuals are encouraged to interpret their private sexual experiences through the lens of identity politics, folding them into larger socio-political narratives. And then what we call Big Sister GenderSpeak and the mandatory rhetoric of empathy that they also promote. If you read any sexologist stuff like that, I sent you that link to the intro to sexology. I mean, that thing was a wonder. We'll have to do some dramatic readings someday. But just think about plugging. There's nothing wrong with or pinning, pegging. I don't know. Anyway, the destigmatization of AGP often employs GenderSpeak, so playing off Big Brother Newspeak or doublespeak. Carefully curated language that prioritizes affirmation and validation over critique or concern. Terms like gender euphoria, valid identities, authentic self, gender identity, all that type of thing, evoke empathy and acceptance. Critics of this framing are dismissed as lacking compassion or reinforcing stigma, sidestepping legitimate concerns about the broader societal implications of normalizing AGP that Vuk and us and other people have brought up oftentimes in vain. Oh God, this went on a bit. I'm not going to do all of it. So questions of power and knowledge. Foucault is one of his best known contributions was this combining the power knowledge framework. The push to reframe AGP as a sexual orientation demonstrates how sexologists operate within the nexus of power and knowledge. So who benefits from destigmatizing AGP? It is an individual seeking societal acceptance or professional fields like sexology that gain relevance and influence by championing these narratives and going on GenSpec and going on the talk show circuit and the podcast circuit and having these foundations. So now we have to, like, we didn't do it right before, but now we're going to study gender dysphoria and gender non-conforming or gender distress use the right way, and maybe they will, God bless them. So, and the consequences of this is, does this framing prioritize the individuals with AGP over societal impact, requiring others to affirm and accommodate their identities? We know that it does. So for women's rights groups have raised concerns about this. We're not going to reiterate them now. We know those very well. And then public skepticism, when you have behaviors that just a while ago were considered private or problematic or reframed as identities, demanding legal protection and societal affirmations. It's kind of identity washing. So it's not a paraphilia. It's not a mental disorder or a condition. No, it's just an identity. It's, my true self, my authentic self. And then that makes it really difficult for those of us who want to be like, well, if you want to redefine man and woman, that isn't just a you thing. That's an everyone thing. When it spreads like it has. And we see that when people want to, struggle over, well, when it's obvious, like that dude at the Olympic thing, Imam Khalif, and now even now it's pretty much known that he has like a micro penis, so it was intersex condition, but he's been, man, he's a man. Still want to have this idea to try to figure out where the cutoff is, and this is because, like you said, these constructs, rather than have just muddied the water, confusion. And what TERFs would say, especially people like Karadansky and others who've been looking at this critically, and also Jennifer Billick, is that the confusion is the point. All this requires confusion. Yeah. And which makes it odd, given that, at least historically, the point of research is to get clarification. Yeah. To separate the wheat from the chaff and all this stuff. But that seems, with this particular area, and I'm assuming could be in others, is just out the window. So I'll quickly wrap up here. So the campaign to, so if you use Foucault's framework to that usually gender mentalists would want to use to critique heteronormativity and the westernization notion of male and female, who knows what. But you can also do it the other way around for analyzing the normalization of AGP, for one example, within the broader context of gender medicine and identity politics, which affect each other. So in terms of if you could use this term biopolitics, that would lead to the question of how does AGP as a sexual orientation fit into the regulation of human bodies and desires, and codes about what's public, what's private, what's appropriate, what's not appropriate, let alone what's a man, what's a woman. My God, can't get more biopolitical than that. Power knowledge. How do sexologists use their authority to shape societal norms and public policy? We've seen that. Advocacy, awareness raising, understanding, this type of thing, to the point, just to use a funny example, because I want to embarrass Tanya, that introduction to sexology course, the lady starts out with 2 examples. And one of the examples was, there's a guy who says he's heterosexual, but he likes, I think, what they call pegging. So when he's about to finish, he likes things to be something stuck up his butt. And he was having a problem because, as I understand it, if I remember this case study, when initially he'd find women who would be okay with doing it like once or twice, but he wanted every time, and he was having a hard time finding women to do that. But she was very great. It's like, you don't have to feel bad about that. We all have what we want and this and that. But the idea that somehow that, so it's just as an example. So no analysis, no critique, no nothing, just like, well, that's, it's cool.
Right.
As if there'd be something wrong with and you can imagine, like, when they used to do, or maybe they still do, back in the day, when a guy wanted to, a transsexual wanted to transition, and they would try to go and like kind of like pressure the wife to be okay with it.
Right?
You know?
Like that guy, remember that guy? What was he wrote a column? Good, Savage Love. I used to read it and he would always tell women to be good, giving, and game. Good, giving, and game. 3 G's. When presented with partners who want to be pegged.
Yeah. Well, what's it? It's not, it's not, he's not trying to, and this is the thing, it's like, well, if he wanted to do that to you, that's one thing. But if that it was just, it was just kind of, this is an example of how rigorous and scientific a discipline sexology is. And this, just again, I'm just my the toes I've dipped into it make me skeptical. Anyway, so subjectification, which means how are individuals encouraged to see themselves and conduct themselves, understand themselves, that these new categories proliferate that. So you have this whole, like Tony was talking about with the gay arsonist or whatever, is that you have this whole apparatus, this conceptual apparatus and this behavioral one that puts body on a skeleton that's not there, if I can use that metaphor in terms of a gender identity. And then the big sister GenderSpeak, how does language play a role in creating, affirming, and enforcing these constructs, which most people, I think, don't see these as constructs. They're just like, oh, I guess this is just, because Vuk, we have some people, and I don't think Tanya was on the show, but it was with Artless. And there was some people who were commenting and saying that they got to the point that they were thinking, oh, well, maybe there are actual transsexual men who buying this thing that there's something that you can have a female brain in a man's body and this type of stuff, because it was so much in the ether, and it was people who have authority and the media and all that modeling acceptance and affirmation, that people started to think, well, maybe there are men and women in this third category.
Yeah, for sure.
Objectively.
That's the whole point of putting it all into society. So we all get, totally.
One of the things that I would, just kind of going through this, what I would like is to have like an opponent, to have an episode with you where you see the problem we have, we all agree on everything, right? Except
for the gays. Yeah. We come from different 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 trajectories.
What do you mean we don't agree about the gays? Who doesn't?
What the gays is.
Oh, the gays.
Sorry, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have brought that up, Vuk.
I thought you meant the homosexuals, right? Okay.
Yeah, let's fight about that.
Oh, the gays. Yeah, the gays. Sorry, no. GACE. Oh my God! If people
just to get it on the record, another thought I had is, as you were talking about this, like we have, like even sometimes, like at the grocery store, I see this. I mean, he's grown up now, but there are kids with like really kind of extreme psychological problems, right? That they can't like speak properly. And then some of them like will act out, like yell inappropriately, like in public, right? Like just again, they're not really aware of very much that's going on. Maybe they can say a few words or whatever, and so I see kind of the mother kind of reacts like, "Don't do that," whatever. And so it's an interesting thing. So in that situation, you're trying to do the best that you can. Obviously this child is never going to fit in, right? But even there, we say, okay, well, we don't kind of yell aggressively in public or this or that, right? So it's interesting in that scenario, no one's saying, well, hold on, maybe this makes this child happy to do that, right? Why are you, saying, oh, well, society's kind of not comfortable with that. Like, it's not the end of the world that the kid yelled at a grocery store,
I'm waiting for, maybe the tide's turned on this, but they're about ready to ban no or any kind of negativity. It's like, you're not supposed to hate. They're going to tell us talking about governmentality, what you can hate, what you can't hate. It's bad to hate this and that and the other. This total.
No, but you see the contradiction I'm pointing out. Like,
no, but some people would. You don't have kids, do you, Vuk? I don't want to pry, but
no, I don't. No.
Okay, I have to tell you that there's some people who do have this philosophy, And
Totally.
and so I'll just use a personal example but it's just one of many. I had an aunt, and she had kids a bit later. So her daughter was, I think, like 6 years younger than me, and her son was like maybe 10. And they went through this kind of like, they went to Evergreen and whatever, but this Montessori thing, and the kids, this kind of like, they're the same. There shouldn't be a hierarchy, and everything has to be talked out and agreed to and explained and all this stuff. And their kids were beasts.
Yeah.
Beasts.
You know what? I recently babysat a child whose parents never said any kind of no.
Mm-hmm.
And it was extremely difficult because
Yeah.
that's like the second word out of my mouth for everything.
Yeah.
But what I was getting at is not the case of like children that are just like regular unruly children. Like this is someone with an obvious clinical problem that's seeing a clinical psychologist. So I'm just juxtaposing that.
Oh, believe me, they were in therapy. But go ahead.
You mean someone who's like, what's the term, neurodivergent? Do you mean someone like the child has autism or something?
Here's the thing, like we don't know how to classify. Just you've seen kids that just basically, we used to call it like mental retardation or something. I mean, like I said, like it's all kinds of stuff. I'm just saying this is a kid who can't talk in proper sentences, right? So it's like a 17-year-old who's sort of like a 3-year-old.
Okay, but what's this analogy of in terms of?
Well, the analogy is with that person, I'm comparing it to AGP. So why can't AGP therapy, hey, look, you shouldn't do this in public. Why can't that be part of the therapy when we do it in other cases of therapy, right? That's what I'm saying. Like, why, you know what I mean, right? Like this kid who can't really control, I'm sure it's a lot easier for the AGP, like if there's no contest, right?
But if they don't have to, then why should they? I mean, I don't think we can expect them to put themselves back in the box.
Yeah, but I get that. But if you go to therapy, again, I'm just trying to be, just remember.
Yeah,
like,
therapists should tell them to tone it down. You can't go out like that. Yeah, they should do that.
No, I agree with you. But what I'm saying is that this has been recategorized.
That's how you get off. Draw a picture. Go draw it.
No, but again, the argument.
Now, that's this whole thing about self-ID and whatnot. Is there's been a concerted effort, a push to get this reclassified, to get it declassified, so it's not a paraphilia, it's not a mental illness, it's a gender identity, it's a sexual, that's why they forced team on with LGB, and now it's
but what about the ones that accept?
And I couldn't say to a homosexual or a heterosexual, why don't you just be that 25% of the time?
No, I get that, but I'm not talking about. I'm talking about people like Blanchard, Bailey, and like Phil, the ones who accept that they say, yeah, I've got this problem. So why isn't part of the therapy? Okay, look, don't do this in public, right?
Because men get to do their sexual gratification rituals in public. And if Bailey cared, if Blanchard cared, if Phil Illy cared one whit about scandalizing women, then none of this would have happened. The whole point is that society enables men to totally live out their 24-hour sexual gratification when women get their toes stepped on. That's what I think.
But you see the contradiction I'm pointing out. Like if I had one of them arguing, I'd say, well, why is that okay and this isn't? Like why?
Yeah, why women have said that and got blocked.
In the context of a debate with Bailey or Blanchard, that's one thing. But if you want to bring in like why, now, and that's the thing that we're on our back.
No, I'm not asking you. I'm just saying this is something I would like to debate with a person who argues for it. I'm just pointing out a hypocrisy.
You should, yeah, go for it.
No, okay, yeah, but that's a different thing. So, but for sure, I mean, that would be great. That would be great. Yeah.
Yeah. No. Like I'm not advocating. I'm just saying this is like a massive piece of evidence to debunk the whole clinical practice, right? Like why have you picked this one thing? And the irony of it is, in one case, you have this child who can't really control their emotions very well, versus a person who clearly can present themselves socially, like Hayden and Nilly, right? Well, what's the problem, right?
Well, yeah, I agree, but why should they have to deny their expression, the expression of their true self? Go ahead, Tanya.
Can I ask you a question? If you said everything you'd said, without the words gender identity, and you'd use sex role stereotypes, for example, then would all of these clinicians and sexologists have been able to come up with this stuff if they had been using, that's a question for you, not for me. I don't know the scope of it. But, if you never say gender identity again, if you always say sex role stereotypes,
yes,
then what happens? What happens to the whole thing?
Yeah, it all falls apart. But that's what
why they don't do it.
said. I have never liked the word gender. I encountered it first from someone working with a sexologist type researcher, and I hated the word, right? You've invented a word, that has all this other baggage, right? So I agree with you, and who knows how things would have ended up, right? If we insisted on that.
Yeah, but it's also the
debated. Sorry, if you debated your Bailey or your Blanchard or whoever, if you Vuk were debating your pro sexologist and said, okay, the term of the debate is that we don't say gender identity, we say sex role stereotype, would that not collapse it from the get-go?
No, because his thing is just he doesn't understand why an AGP feels the way he does, and his position is just, okay, he feels super compelled to do this. Who are we to stop him, right? It's not illegal. You can dress however you like. So who are we to stop him? That's the position. Has nothing to do, like Bailey doesn't believe in gender souls or any of that. All he believes in is, well, here's a group of people who behave this way, right? So he's super like behaviorist, right? That's why I'm saying he's good as a scientist. You can't challenge him at this other layer that you can, a lot of the gender activists. He's not like that. Right.
So he'd need to debate with someone who's like a political scientist and say,
I'd like to debate all of them. Okay. Anyone. But again, I prefer someone who's convinced they're being super scientific. That's who I'd like to debate the most.
Well, I'll be watching that. That'll be interesting.
Yeah. We're also fairly certain that that one of these guys that he's been talking to probably has like Ayn Rand on his bookshelf and is pretty libertarian.
Maybe.
So.
Yeah. But here's the problem. Like, I don't have like a presence or anything like that. So if there's going to be a debate, Tara's going to be the one who arranges it for me, right? Because I don't know.
Well, let me.
Like, I could possibly get Bailey and say, you want to have this debate with me on this show, right? I could do that.
No, that would be great. No, I'm just saying that I also know, it's a baby channel, so I wish I had that kind of juice. But I have no problem emailing or emailing someone and asking them.
Yeah. Again, my problem with Bailey, like I said, I have this like friendship conflict here with this, right? That's
this is an off-camera. This is an off-camera discussion because we're still alive. So we should probably wrap it up. So,
but he and I should be able to do this politely. The two of us,
yeah, for
right?
sure. No, for sure. I can put my polite hat on. I don't think I've forgotten completely how to.
I probably can't, so I won't be offended if I don't get the invitation to that one. Where's my live stream?
So this was the birth of sexology, from the gender industry series, and I did a bit of flourish, and I did an introduction, how in terms of how Michel Foucault, if he was still alive and was doing an emeritus lecture someplace, how he would talk about the birth of sexology again, because for those of you who know, he wrote about the birth of the clinic and the birth of, the prison and the history of sexuality and history of madness and all this kind of stuff. That was what he was, I guess, a historian of. However, and I brought that up because gender people in the gender studies in particular, but also sexology, not the clinical part, they love to name drop Foucault, at least, because he, and the reason why is because they can use and be like, well, this is just a dispositif, this sex binary and this thing that was just, this is a power knowledge apparatus, and we're challenging that and want to replace it with this other one. And so, but anyway, and so we talked about, that was the main thing of the show. Sexologists are part and parcel of the gender industry. They give it, they benefit from it, and they help reproduce it, not just reproduce it, but expand it in terms of the buffet of gender identities, and also switching things from being a disorder or an illness of some kind, or a paraphilia or a fetish, to either a gender identity or a sexual orientation, etc. So on that note, anything you want to say about sexologists, the sex industry, anything, Tanya, before we wrap it up? Anything. Or nothing.
I would say that their contribution has been useless, and they should just take themselves off.
Have either of you seen that
anybody
show,
listening
Masters? Oh, sorry.
No. I think that they lend themselves to being used as a tool of cultural imperialism. For example, getting genderism accepted in countries that don't know what the hell that even means, right? Like where I am now, I think they're just tools. They're just tools, honestly.
These minority genders. I learned that today. I can have a majority body, but a minority gender.
It's amazing how quickly people can go from being like, what? Of course there's no such thing, to, oh yeah, those poor ones there, with just a little bit of a help of a sexologist, right?
Yeah.
Some article or
anyway, I'm not.
Have either of you seen the show Masters of Sex?
Oh, that was based on Kinsey, wasn't it?
Yeah.
No, I heard about it, but I didn't watch it.
Oh God.
How was it?
What's that? Well, again, it was just like so absurd, right? Like, she starts off as
too. It was him, and then Money, or Money and him. It was Kinsey, and then
I think Kinsey was first.
Yeah, Kinsey
was first, right? But Johnson, she kind of starts off as a secretary. But here's what I loved about this framing. It's like, so in his spare time, he does his little sexology experiments and that, like watching people have sex and things that, recruiting people, right? So it's just this voyeuristic, whatever. I mean, the TV show is, right? But my favorite was, she's so enthralled and, wants to study, like he's this leading edge scientist, like this is like the most important thing in the world, right? Like that whole absurdity, right?
Doing God's work.
Yeah.
You know what surprised me, as a little factoid, is that when I was looking at trying to figure out sexologists, like, and if there's accreditation in this, like I said, there's this various fields of them, and there's also people who will get a doctorate or either in medicine or psychology, and then they do this side thing, and just find kind of the Wild West is. But the people who only go to like a master's level, and it's an interdisciplinary degree, so it's not a medical degree or anything like that. It's kind of I guess it's kind of, I don't know. It's an interdisciplinary, so we all know what that means. Wink, wink. And I found that for some reason, India has a crazy amount of sexologists. Like India proper, not like there's Indian sexologists, but in India, so many. And a lot of them, the gender identity, this, and the helping prepare for the transition, and all, it's all on every menu. I didn't come across one website for a gender clinic or a sexologist that didn't have broadly possessed gender identity services or gender identity support or this type of thing. So I was like, okay, what's going on? I mean, obviously there's lots of Indians that have sex, but apparently they're concerned about their sexual, because, and then when you talk about the voyeuristic part, when I found out that there's the hands off and hands on sexology therapists. So the ones like, let's say if you're I won't use myself in this one, but let's say you're a woman and you're concerned that, that maybe you're frigid, or you can't climax vaginally. Sorry, Tanya. Or maybe never, I don't know. And so then if you went to a hands-on, I think that's the way, or a touch one, then that doctor would help you discover how to, how to wink, wink. That's also something that certain types of sexologists do, which is, what that's neither here nor there, but
is the doctor opposite sex in these cases?
That I think you could pick. Because I know I saw, and I thought it was a joke. I didn't think it was real. And I saw something on, because it was a TV, and there was somebody who was like, the doctor was like a sex doctor, sexologist, I guess. And he worked with couples though. And so he would like give them homework assignments, and sometimes it'd be like demonstrations, and he might demonstrate like on the doll and then ask the person to, I mean, it's all very polyamorous. But I'm sure they try to make it clinical, like, well, they wear a glove or it's on over the clothes. I don't know. But that's an interesting job it's kind of borderline
prostitution, right?
Yeah, I was gonna say you know? Oh, I'm not going to him for a prostitute. He's my sex therapist. You know, he's helping me have multiple whatever. I mean, sorry. I'm gonna get embarrassed here. So anyway, no, it was I was just surprised at how many sexologists there were in India, because technically still fairly conservative, yeah, but lots of sexologists. Anyway, do you want to say anything else, Vuk?
No.
Sorry. We all have that image, and I can't even imagine. And I don't know, maybe I'm getting prudish in there, but I even, well, not that anybody likes getting their, you know, their lady exams. They call it like I will call it pap smear in the States. But
Pap smears like it probably.
Yeah. It's like, it's just like, even that, I just want to get it in, and, you know, and I can't imagine we do a hands-on sexologist to, you know, help me attain better sexual well-being or sexual. Anyway.
Yeah, I think kind of like there is a voyeurism that fuels all of this. And what I mean is kind of like in the public, that's why these shows as well. And remember, like, was it Dr. Ruth? You know?
Oh, yeah.
Look at this old lady talking about sex. You said, I mean,
she was probably a sexologist.
Yeah, like there's kind of like a circus aspect of it vis-a-vis the society at large, right? It's always going to be entertaining, and you know, and I guess we didn't touch on it. Like, why this? Like, what about all the other things in psychology, things that people have problems with, right?
Well, they hit the jackpot in a way. I mean, not that they knew ahead of time, but you know, now they get to go on and educate people and write booklets and consult on the development of sex ed courses, and you know, yeah. And anyway, thank you, Tanya.
Thank you.
Thank you for what's the word? I can't even think anymore. I'm also spent here.
Yes.
Anyway, thank you, Tanya.
Thank you very much.
Vuk, lovely. You have a lovely backdrop. Tanya has a lovely backdrop. I'm gonna have to do something.
I like it.
And look, I still with the gray. Anyway,
it's all right. Hey, Tara, if anyone, like, this was a live stream, right?
Yes.
Or is it not?
No, it's live.
It is.
It is live. Okay. Well, anyways, I don't know if like if you're gonna edit it, whatever. Just put a note out, like if there's someone who wants to ask me a question or whatever, like I'm cool with that, right?
For sure.
Cool.
Everybody, if anybody has a question for Vuk, our positivist, our morbid symptoms contributing positivist, and with the PhD in clinical psychology and very analytical and
cognitive psychology.
Cognitive psychology, very no nonsense. Please, you can, you know, next time he can put it, anyway, you can, if you send it to me, I'll send it to him, or you can put it, yeah, that's the best way, because I don't read the video comments afterwards, because it's too, even I have my threshold. If you're on Twitter and someone's just responding to what you say, that's one thing. But when you're on this, people will respond to how you look, how you sound, all kinds of things. And I'm just like, it's too much for me. But you guys can feel free to look over the comments if you want. But the best way to get a hold of me is through Twitter. And yeah, probably put my email at some point. Anyway, that's lovely, Vuk. Thank you so much. I'm happy to have you on board, because you do, obviously, you bring a different perspective and institutional knowledge than the two of us do. So I think it's a good thing. But of course, we're going to have to, every once in a while, it'll take us some time to understand each other, but we'll get there.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. That's why I'm partly looking for feedback, to if someone says, well, I didn't quite understand that or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Well, I'm sure you'll get some. All right, everybody. Thank you very much. Please do like, subscribe. We're a baby channel, and we will be back next week. We'll see who we do. We might do the big poobahs. We might do like Pritzkers and Rothblatt or something. Have some fun with it in terms of the keys, those types of key stakeholders, the rich billionaires slash male women or whatever that we're gonna call them. So that'll be next week. And adios. Happy New Year. Vuk, thank you. Tanya, thank you. Everybody, thank you. See you next time. Take care, everyone.
Bye.
Bye. Oops. Sorry. No, we're lagging.